What if a single act of kindness could change everything? What if a wild beast remembered the hand that once saved it? It began in the heart of the Western Ghats, where emerald canopies stretch endlessly and the mist kisses the earth with the hush of forgotten prayers. This was no ordinary place. This was a living, breathing world, far removed from civilization. A sanctuary where time slows and the boundaries between human and animal blur under the weight of survival. Here lived Anika Rao. At 32, she had the eyes of someone who had seen too much too soon, a veterinarian by training, a healer by instinct, and a woman running not just from the city, but from guilt. She had once lived in Mumbai, thriving in a prestigious wildlife hospital, until one night shattered everything. A call at 2:17 a.m. from local police. Her younger brother Veer, a forest ranger, and the only family she had left, had been found shot in the back near the edge of a protected reserve. Evidence pointed to poachers. No arrests were ever made. She never forgave herself. They had argued weeks before. He had begged her to leave the comfort of clinics and come help in the field, where the real fight is. She refused. Now she fought in his name. So Anika left behind everything, the city, the hospital, the accolades, and moved into the rugged, humid belly of the forest, volunteering in a remote sanctuary called Van Raksha. There were no paved roads, no phone towers, and power came and went like fickle weather. But the forest, it spoke, and she listened. She became known among the locals as the one who stays. Rain or fire, snakebite or fever, Anika stayed, and she healed. Wounded civets, hornbills with broken wings, even leopards caught in wire snares. But nothing changed her life like the night she found the tiger cub. It was the monsoon of her second year there. She had received word from a tracker about strange movement near the northeastern corridor, an area dangerously close to known poacher paths. She set out at dawn with 2 rangers and her medical kit slung across her back. They found the cub under the roots of a fallen banyan tree, crying, not with the high-pitched whimper of an abandoned animal, but the low, strangled moan of something trying not to die. His right leg was mangled, twisted into a grotesque angle, bones visible where steel jaws had torn through flesh. A poacher's trap. He should have died. They almost left him. Rangers argued protocol, but Anika refused. "He has fight in his eyes," she said. "He's not done yet." She named him Shira, after the Sanskrit word for soul. What followed was 6 months of battle. She fed him with an eyedropper. She crushed painkillers into goat milk. She stitched his wounds by kerosene light, while insects buzzed against the netting like tiny demons. At one point, infection nearly took him. She didn't sleep for 3 days. But he lived, and he grew. What began as a creature barely the size of a house cat became a young predator with a hunter's stare and paws that thudded when he walked. But more than his size, it was his presence that changed. He no longer whimpered. He watched. He studied. He understood. He followed her voice, nuzzled her hand, but never fully submitted. He remained wild at the edges, like fire you can hold for a second before it bites. When Shira turned 2, Anika faced the hardest decision of her life. The sanctuary did not keep wild animals indefinitely. If they were healed and strong enough to survive, they were returned to the forest. That was the mission. The day they opened the enclosure, he hesitated only once, a brief glance back as if to memorize her face. Then he disappeared into the trees without a sound. Anika wept harder than she had at her brother's funeral. In the months that followed, she searched for him sometimes, not to reclaim him, but to know. Trackers occasionally found paw prints they claimed were too big for a juvenile, but there was no proof. Still, she felt him. Some days she'd wake and feel watched, not by danger, but by memory. Yet the forest had begun to shift. Anika started noticing strange signs: snapped branches far from elephant trails, cigarette butts near watering holes, voices echoing at night when no patrols were scheduled. The government was stretched thin, and corruption lived in the pockets of those who could be bought. Whispers of a poaching ring re-emerging began to grow louder. This time they weren't just after ivory or hides, they were trafficking live animals. Tigers fetched more money alive than dead. She raised concerns. Officials dismissed her. There's no concrete evidence, they said. Stay focused on the animals. But the animals were uneasy. The elephants passed through faster. The birds stopped nesting near the southern ridge. Even the wind seemed to carry warnings. Then came the letter. No name, just blocky handwriting. "You're in our way. Leave now." She burned it. Not out of courage, but anger. The forest had taken her brother. She wouldn't let it be devoured by the same hands that pulled the trigger. Still, fear seeped in. She stopped going into the woods alone, carried a flare gun, trained at night with a stun baton until her hands blistered, and yet, even through the haze of dread, part of her waited for something or someone. Then came the day it all converged. It was supposed to be routine, collecting soil samples for a biodiversity survey near the far edge of the sanctuary. Her assistant called in sick, so she went alone. The sun hung low behind a veil of grey clouds. The cicadas were quiet, too quiet. She parked her jeep and began collecting near a fallen tree, the same type of roots where she had once found a bleeding cub. But now the air smelled of oil, rubber, sweat. When she looked up, she wasn't alone. 3 men stepped out from the underbrush. Their faces were shadowed, but the weapons were clear. Machetes, a rusted hunting rifle, and eyes that held no fear of consequence. "You're the doctor, right?" one of them asked. He smiled, showing a gold tooth. "I heard you care more about animals than people." She didn't speak, didn't move. "Bad choice coming out here alone," said another. "Very bad." She turned slowly, fingers reaching for her bag. Not for a weapon, just a signal flare. Her hands trembled. "Drop it," the first man said. She froze. This was it. No rangers, no radio, no way out. Then, from deep within the forest, a low rumble. She thought it was thunder, but thunder doesn't breathe. And what happened next? No one could have predicted. The sound came again, deeper now. Not from above, but below. Beneath the layers of soil and stone, vibrating faintly in Annika's bones. It was not thunder, it was a growl. The men didn't hear it at first, or perhaps they ignored it, convinced they ruled this forgotten edge of the world. One stepped forward, kicking her bag aside with a grunt. Another circled behind, close enough that she could smell the acrid stench of sweat soaked into synthetic fabric. "Empty your pockets," one of them barked. "Phone, GPS, whatever you got." "I don't have anything," Annika said, her voice low, steady. Her body, however, trembled like a bowstring drawn too tight. The third man leaned close, his breath rancid. "That's okay. We'll take what we want anyway." She didn't flinch. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. But fear was clawing up her spine, cold and primal. She'd been trained for emergencies, snake bites, rabid dogs, even a charging elephant once. But not this. Not the intimate kind of terror that comes when you realize no one is coming for you. When death is not an idea, but a face inches from your own. And then, all at once, the forest changed. The birds, silent for minutes, now shrieked and scattered in every direction. A flock of hornbills exploded out of the trees like a black wave. The underbrush behind the men rustled violently. The man with the machete turned just in time to see the foliage erupt. A streak of orange and white burst forth like a phantom torn from legend. Massive, furious, silent no more. The tiger struck the first man mid-torso, knocking him to the ground with such force that the air seemed to leave the forest. The machete flew from his hand, spinning once before embedding in a tree trunk. The man screamed, but the sound was cut short by the weight of 200 kilograms of muscle and rage pressing against his chest. The second man, the one with the rifle, raised it, but he was too slow. The tiger's roar came like a shockwave, and he dropped the weapon, stumbling back. Annika stood frozen, the scene unraveling in slow motion before her. Time lost meaning. The beast was everywhere, teeth bared, fur rippling like fire, eyes like twin suns fixed on its prey. And yet, it did not touch her. She could have sworn he looked at her just for a second, and the chaos fell away. Recognition, memory, connection. The third man ran, vanished into the jungle, crashing through brambles like a wounded deer. The man beneath the tiger whimpered, blood streaking his shirt, but he was alive. Barely. The one who had circled behind her stood paralyzed, mouth agape, weapon dangling at his side. His knees buckled. The tiger stepped off the first man, then turned, slow, deliberate, and faced the others. He did not attack again. He didn't need to. The message had been delivered. The forest had spoken. The two remaining intruders stumbled over themselves, tripping, crawling, sobbing as they disappeared into the trees. One of them left behind a boot, the other his pride, and then silence. The kind of silence that only comes after a storm, when the air is thick with the memory of violence and something sacred has just occurred. Annika still hadn't moved. The tiger turned to her. He was enormous now, a full-grown male, scarred across the left flank, the old wound from the poacher's trap still faintly visible beneath his fur. His breath steamed in the air, heavy and rhythmic. His body was coiled, majestic and terrifying. And his eyes, oh God, his eyes, golden, intelligent, haunted. Shira. She didn't say his name. She didn't dare. But her hand lifted slowly, as it had so many times before, when he was just a wounded cub clinging to life. And he came, not with the ferocity of moments earlier, but with grace, like a ghost returning to a world that had already buried him. He lowered his head, the way he used to, and nudged her hand with his muzzle. She touched his brow, fingers resting on the place where the trap had once nearly killed him. He let her. No growl, no tension, just silence. A single breath shared between woman and beast. She collapsed to her knees, not from fear, from something deeper. The release of a weight she hadn't known she carried. Tears poured freely, and she did not hide them. For in that moment, she was not the vet, not the woman marked by grief, not the lone guardian of a crumbling sanctuary. She was just Annika. And Shira was more than a tiger. He was the answer to a question she'd stopped asking long ago. Is it possible that the wild remembers? They stayed like that for minutes, or maybe hours. Time folded in on itself. The sun dipped lower, brushing the trees with amber. The wind shifted, cool and tender. When Shira finally stepped back, there was no hesitation, no confusion. He had come for her. He had protected her. But he was still a creature of the forest. And the forest was calling. He walked away without looking back. This time, she didn't cry. She understood. Love, in its purest form, does not cling. It honors. It lets go. She gathered what was left of her bag and hiked back to the sanctuary. Her knees trembled, her body aching, but she moved with a purpose. A fire lit behind her eyes, not vengeance, conviction. She reported everything. This time the rangers believed her. The men had left behind enough to trace: broken GPS units, a bloodied machete, a half-crushed cigarette case with a known emblem. An investigation began, quiet, discreet. The authorities didn't want scandal, but things were changing. Cameras were installed, fences reinforced, patrols doubled, and word spread, whispered first, then louder. There is a tiger who protects the woman. Leave the forest, or he will come. Of course, not everyone believed it. A myth, they said, a fantasy cooked up to scare off poachers. Some called it propaganda, others divine intervention. Annika never gave interviews. She didn't seek the spotlight. She only smiled when asked. But some nights, when the sky turned silver and the wind rushed in low over the earth, she would walk to the edge of the sanctuary and sit beneath a fig tree, the same one where she had once found a dying cub. And sometimes, just sometimes, she would hear it again. Not a growl, not thunder, breath, close, watching, knowing, and she would whisper, "Thank you, Shira." Weeks passed, then months. The forest, scarred by what had happened, seemed to exhale, as if it too had held its breath. Life slowly resumed its rhythm. The birds returned to the trees. The deer, once skittish, began grazing near the sanctuary again. Even the elephants, cautious in their migration, moved with less urgency. But for Annika Rao, nothing would ever be the same. She had been changed, not just by terror or by the violence of that day, but by something much deeper, something ancient, something spiritual. She had seen with her own eyes what most would call impossible. A wild predator, not only recognizing her, but choosing to protect her. Not out of instinct, not hunger, but memory. Every night she played that moment over in her mind. The look in Shira's eyes, the way he lowered his head to her hand, as if offering his loyalty, not as a pet, but as a guardian, as an equal. And as the outside world caught wind of the incident, it refused to stay silent. The whispers turned into articles, then blog posts, then full-blown segments on national television. The woman the tiger saved. Jungle angel. The beast who remembers. Wildlife enthusiasts debated the plausibility. Some claimed it was a 1-in-a-billion anomaly. Others said it was emotional projection, that Shira had simply been protecting his territory. But those who had seen Annika's eyes as she told the story knew better. You don't fabricate awe. You don't invent that kind of soul-deep grief turned into reverence. The sanctuary became a symbol, not of fear, but of faith. People came not to gawk, but to help. Donations flowed in. New rangers were trained. New fences were built. The local government, once reluctant, now declared the forest a protected biosphere with stricter penalties for intrusion and poaching. And yet, even with all this, Annika remained who she was, quiet, observant, grounded. She didn't need the headlines, the attention. She only wanted one thing: to make sure the forest lived, to protect the delicate bond between humanity and the wild that so many had forgotten. And sometimes, when she stood at the edge of the tree line and closed her eyes, she could feel him, not see, not hear, but feel. There was a presence there, just beyond the veil of branches, just beyond the range of human sight. A breath, a watching, a knowing. Shira was out there. She could feel his pulse in the soil, the heat of his gaze in the wind, the memory of him in the stillness after rain. And in her heart, she knew something others couldn't begin to understand. That connection, real connection, the kind forged not by force, but by compassion, never truly dies. It transforms. It takes root. It grows into something that neither time nor wilderness can erase. But even peace has its fragility. One morning, while reviewing footage from a newly installed camera near the eastern ridge, Annika froze. The image was grainy, but unmistakable. Two men, one with a radio, the other with a high-caliber rifle slung casually over his shoulder. Both wore no uniforms, no insignias. Poachers. Again, they were scouting, not acting yet, but watching, mapping routes, calculating risk. And for the first time since the attack, Annika felt the familiar heat of fury crawl into her chest. Not fear, not despair, resolve. She contacted the Forest Intelligence Bureau, pushed them, showed them timestamps, patterns, heat signatures. She demanded they act, not later, not after a tragedy, now. The wheels began to turn. A covert team was deployed, unmarked trucks, plainclothes officers, drones disguised as birds. But days turned into weeks. The poachers moved like shadows, always one step ahead, until they made a mistake. One of them dropped a tracker, a tiny device no larger than a coin, embedded in a boot heel. It pinged. The coordinates led to a clearing near the old banyan grove, where Shira had once slept years ago. Annika went with the rangers. She wasn't supposed to, but she had to. When they arrived, the clearing was empty, but the scent was fresh, the fire pit still warm. They'd been there. And then a sound, low, familiar. The growl came from the ridgeline. All heads turned. There he stood, Shira. But he wasn't alone. 2 cubs, young, still lanky, with unsteady gaits, peeked out behind him. Their stripes not yet fully defined, their eyes wide. Annika gasped. Tears welled instantly. He had a family. He had survived, thrived, and brought life into the world. And in that moment, surrounded by rangers, by officers, by hardened men used to tracking death, no one spoke, no one moved. They all just watched. A male tiger with his cubs, in the wild, unafraid, not because he was tame, but because he knew he was safe, because she was there, because he remembered. The moment passed in seconds. Shira turned, nudged the cubs gently, and vanished into the forest with the fluid elegance of smoke in the wind. The poachers were captured 3 nights later, attempting to lay traps near the southern stream. Annika was called in to identify equipment and recognized one of the rifles. It was the same man from the clearing years before, the one who had threatened her, the one who had run. Justice came quietly. There were no headlines, no parades, just the quiet removal of rot from sacred ground. Annika stood at the heart of the sanctuary that night, hand resting on the bark of an old sal tree, and finally allowed herself to believe the forest was healing. And so was she. In the time that followed, she began writing, not for publication, not for fame, but for memory, for truth. She chronicled everything: the rescue, the raising, the release, the return, the impossible protection, and the gift of legacy. Because what Shira had given her wasn't just safety, it was purpose, a reason to stay, a reason to believe, and a truth the world desperately needed to hear: that love, real love, is not limited by species. That loyalty, when born from kindness, echoes louder than fear. That even in the wildest hearts there is room to remember, and maybe you too needed to hear this. Maybe you felt that the world has become too cruel, too distant, that compassion has no place in survival. But the forest tells a different story, Annika's story, Shira's story. If this moved you, don't let it end here. Share this story. Speak for the ones who cannot. Support wildlife sanctuaries. Sponsor a rescue. Be the hand that reaches out, not the one that turns away, because somewhere out there a life might remember you, and when it matters most, it might just come back, to protect, to honor, to love.